Hello, good evening. Welcome. Just going to allow folks to join from the waiting room for 1 minute before we go get started. Okay, so good evening and welcome everyone to the October 22nd virtual learning session for the Building Appliance Rules 9.4 and 9.6 implementation. My name is Nahala Pakji, and my colleagues at Kearns and West and I have been supporting the Air District staff with facilitating the implementation working group over the past year and a half or so. One reminder that this meeting is being recorded. So the meeting recording will be available on the project website in the coming days, and the presentation slides are going to be on the website as well, and that's linked in the chat. So if you have any Zoom technical issues during today's meeting, please send a message to my colleague Britta Romans in the chat box describing your issue, and we'll also be going over Zoom settings shortly. So while folks are trickling into today's learning session, we will launch a quick poll to learn more about who all is joining us today in the Zoom room. So Britta, can you please launch the poll, and we'll give folks about 3 to 4 minutes to complete the poll and go over results together. For those of us who are joining, we are asking everyone to please complete the poll. So there should be a poll that popped up on your screen. Just trying to get an idea of who is joining us this evening in the Zoom room for the virtual learning session on the building appliance rules. Okay, more folks are joining, so I just want to welcome you all. Good evening. We are allowing folks a few more minutes or maybe another just a minute to complete a quick poll. It's a Zoom poll that should pop up on your screen, and it's just getting an idea of who all is joining us in the Zoom room today. Hey, I'm sure you're wrapping up. So I wanted to just quickly go over the poll results. So with the, we're just going to focus on the questions 3 and after 3. So the third question is asking about your industry. So you should be able to see the results on your screen. And it looks like we have the majority of the folks here at 27% are representing a nonprofit. We have folks from 23% from government, 20% from community, and 16% from advocacy groups and a few others. So this is great. Thanks so much for being here. Let's see if there's other industries. Let's see. It's not allowing me to see that, so we might have to look at that later. And as far as familiarity with the building appliances rules, 9.4 and 9.6 amendments, it looks like the majority of the folks in the room are, or the highest percentage, I guess, are somewhat familiar, and that's at 36%, and 30% are moderately familiar. And actually, that's pretty great that 27% are very familiar. So that's great. And then we have 7% who are not familiar at all. So that's really helpful as we launch into our presentation. So thanks again for completing the poll. And I think we can move on to our next slide. Okay, so just quickly, I want to go over some of the instructions on how to use Zoom. So we will have a Q&A session at the end of tonight's learning session. So after the presentation from the Air District staff has completed, you are welcome to raise your Zoom hand by going to the reactions or the smiley face on the bottom of your Zoom screen, and raising your hand by clicking on the hand raise function. From there, I will be able to see if there's a queue, and then I will ask you to go to the microphone and mute or unmute yourself if you're asking a question verbally. We also are going to encourage folks to put your questions in the chat as well. So either way, we'll be tracking chat and verbal questions and comments after the presentation. If you would like to see who else is in the room, you can also click on participants and look through there. And you can also click on closed captioning if you need assistance with being able to hear or to listen to the presentations and read the closed captioning. So I think that's it. I don't think that we have the video function available tonight right now. Let me double check actually. I think you can go on and off. So it's up to you. No pressure to turn on your video when you're speaking, but it is up to you. So you're welcome to click on that video camera and say hello to folks when you ask your question. Okay, so we can go on to the next slide. So this is our participation instructions. So again, to ask a question, we encourage you to please type your questions in the chat, and you're welcome to use emoji reactions to thumbs up a question that you would like to have answered. So if someone else put a question in the chat that you really want us to focus on, you can kind of vote by putting the emoji in the chat box and putting a thumbs up that you would like us to answer it, someone from the Air District to answer it. And again, to speak, I will call on folks who are raising their hands in the order that I see them. And also, if anyone's joining from on the phone, you can dial *6 to unmute yourself when prompted. And I think *9, I believe, is to raise your hand on your phone. So you would do *9 to raise your hand, and then I would call on you, and then you can use *6 to go off mute and ask your question. So your questions will be answered in the order that we receive them. And again, for those of you who joined us more recently, if you need any assistance at all, technical assistance, please reach out to the Zoom Tech host, Britta Romans, via chat. You can message her directly. Next slide, please. Okay, we have a quick slide just covering our community guidelines, just to ensure a safe, respectful space as we meet here this evening. So we do encourage you to please rename yourself and provide your affiliation if it applies. So how you would do that is you could click on the participants at the bottom of the Zoom, your Zoom screen, find your name, and there are 3 dots that are after your name, and you can click that and put rename. You can also click on the box with your name at the top of the Zoom screen, and there will be 3 dots as well, and you can click rename to provide your name and affiliation if it applies. We also just ask you generally to engage respectfully. We know that we're all here to learn, and that's great. So people of all levels of understanding are welcome to engage and ask questions after the presentation. And again, throughout the presentation, you are welcome to use the chat to communicate your comments and questions to the speakers. And again, we'll do our best to answer all the questions in the chat. If we're not able to answer all of the questions, they will be relayed to the Air District project team. And we will try our best to follow up with you. If you want to leave your email address, feel free. Some of you might have registered as well. So we would find a way to coordinate in the best way that we can. So thank you. Okay, and then we can move on to our outline. So this is the outline of what we'll be talking about this evening and learning about this evening. So we will learn about why the building appliance rules, and then we'll go into an overview of the building appliance rules. Learn a bit about the implementation working group. We'll go into concerns and key takeaways that we've learned through both the working group and various other opportunities to engage the public. And then we will go into next steps and discussion and Q&A. So let's see. So with that, I would like to welcome Gregory Nudd, who's the Deputy Executive Officer of Science and Policy at the Air District, to provide opening remarks. Thank you, Greg.
Thank you. Again, welcome everyone. We really appreciate your participation tonight. I just want to set kind of the framework for why this process is important and why these regulations are important. A lot of folks don't realize that the air in the Bay Area is too polluted. We look to our neighbors to the south sometimes and congratulate ourselves on our clean air. But in fact, our air does not meet federal standards, and there are significant public health consequences as a result. Gas-fired water heaters and space heaters are a big part of that problem. When you add up all of these appliances in the Bay Area, they're a huge source of pollution, causing dozens of premature deaths every year, and disproportionately in communities of color. But cleaning up all these appliances is going to be really challenging. So we greatly appreciate folks participating in the process and helping us think through how to do this in the fairest and most equitable way. We see this ongoing process. We see the implementation as an ongoing process. This is one step in something that we're going to be doing for a number of years. And we're going to make adjustments as we can during the process. So your participation is welcome, it's helpful, and it helps the area as a whole move toward a cleaner future in a way that is fair and protects health. So right now I want to hand off to Jennifer Lamb, who's an assistant manager in the Rules and Strategic Policy, to kick off our presentation.
Great.
Thanks, Greg. So the slide that's up here right now is actually going to be, it's just a quick glossary. I'm not going to read them now. Britt is actually going to throw a link in the chat of where these slides are already posted on our website. So if there's anything on here that we say something that doesn't quite make sense, you can always go back to this and to that link that Britt is going to put in the chat of to go back to this. We'll also do our best to define everything as we go through the presentation here. So won't try to throw too many acronyms at you. So first of all, we're going to talk about why building appliances are important. And so as Greg sort of previewed for me, these are a big regional source of air pollution. Buildings and the combustion of natural gas from space and water heaters emits nitrogen oxides, which we also refer to as NOx, and other harmful air pollutants. And so NOx or nitrogen oxides contribute to developing or worsening of respiratory illnesses such as asthma and other illnesses, as well as the formation of particulate matter, which is sometimes referred to as PM, and ozone, which is one of the main components of smog. And so these are really important for regional air pollution and something that we really want to focus on and look for as we're moving forward. And I apologize for not cueing the slide on that one. So we can go to the next slide now. So we're actually going to launch another quick Zoom poll. And that's going to pop up on your screen in a second of why building appliances are important. But if you're able to launch that. Yes, I think so this is how old is your water heater? So if it's something that if people know this or not in their in your home, give everyone just a quick minute. Okay, so I think that once folks are done with that, Britt, I think you can click to the next slide, just the one animation on this slide. So we're just want to sort of check in on the how old is your water heater? It's something that we don't really know. I think this is something that folks don't really think about a ton in their home, but natural gas combustion from space and water heating actually emits more nitrogen oxides or NOx, that pollutant that we talked about on the last slide, than either fuel refining, so the refineries in the Bay Area, or all of the passenger vehicles in the Bay Area on an annual basis. So obviously all of these sources have other pollutants as well, but when we're talking about nitrogen oxides, this is actually a larger source than those two categories. And so it's not something we think about every day, but we think it's really important. The reason why we focus on space and water heating particularly, and I think we can see the results of the poll if everyone wants to take a look at that. But the reason why we focus on space and water heating in particular is because space and water heating actually account for about 90% of the residential natural gas emissions of NOx. And so while there are definitely emissions from dryers and stovetops, and while I would encourage everyone to turn on their exhaust fan when they're using a gas stove to protect the air quality in your home. From a regional perspective, space and water heating are the really big drivers of emissions here, of regional air quality, as well as regional health impacts in the Bay Area. And so that is why we're focusing on these appliances when we look at these rules. So you can go to the next slide. So we talked a little bit about the regional air quality and the health benefits associated with that. And so we're really looking at the opportunity to improve regional air quality from the outdoor venting of these appliances. And we're also, and as a result, lowering that particulate matter exposure, and as Greg previewed, particularly in communities of color in the Bay Area. And when we did our analysis for these rules, we can look at avoiding up to $890 million per year in health impacts due to air pollution exposure resultant from these appliances, and the potential reductions we would get from the rule amendments, and also prevent up to 85 premature deaths per year. So again, we see this as a really important source and something that's really important to look at as we move forward. So let me go to the next slide. So now I'm going to talk, so we've sort of been talking the building appliance rules. So what are they? What is she talking about? What are these rules? So we can go to the next slide. So since 1983, the Bay Area Air Quality Management District has had 2 rules that have requirements for NOx emissions from space and water heating. And for furnaces, the rule is Regulation 9, Rule 4, or 9-4, and for water heaters is Rule 9-6, and these apply to natural gas-fired furnaces and water heaters. And as we said before, these rules do not apply to stoves, dryers, or water heaters, or boilers that are larger than 2 million BTU per hour. And so that's something that would be typically found in a larger commercial space, a large multifamily building, or any other appliances, such as pool heaters or anything like that, not covered in our rules. Also, again, these apply to natural gas fired appliances, so it does not apply to propane fired appliances or anything else, non-natural gas fuels. And we also, mobile home furnaces are also exempt from the rules. And again, these apply to newly installed equipment. So all of our emission requirements for these rules are when an appliance is either sold or installed in the Bay Area. So we can go to the next slide. So as I noted, these are point of sale rules, and in March of 2023, we adopted amendments to our existing rules that have had NOx standards for a while to include a 0 NOx standard. And so our compliance dates for those moving forward are shown on the slide. So for small water heaters, our first compliance date coming up is January 1st, 2027. And so after January 1st, 2027, a newly manufactured appliance to be sold or installed in the Bay Area must meet that 0 NOx requirement. And then we have rules for furnaces in 2029, and larger water heaters, as well as tankless water heaters, actually fall under that last category in 2031. As Donnie's going to preview for you coming up, we're focusing on the small water heaters, that 2027 date right now, as that's where a lot of our research is focused. That's why we're coming up on it soon. And that's what we want to focus on. So from that, and I have seen a few questions in the chat, and I think the one that I'm going to answer right now, and we'll come back to all these at the end of the presentation, we promise, is that we are focusing on space and water heating right now. We do not have active plans to include dryers, stoves, or any of those other appliances that I mentioned. So this is our focus at this time because of that 90% of emissions and the regional impact that I mentioned before. So I'm going to pass it to my colleague Adania to take over the presentation from here.
Good evening, everyone. And thank you, Jen. My name is Idania Zamora, and I am an assistant manager in the Planning and Climate Protection Division. And I am one of the project managers supporting this effort. While these rules have significant health benefits, there were also implementation concerns expressed by the public during the rule development process. To be responsive to the public, the adopted rules require that staff report on implementation costs, available technology, incentive programs, and infrastructure readiness 2 years before each of the compliance dates that you just saw in the previous slide. To help staff meet this requirement, the Air District convened an implementation working group, or IWG, after rule adoption. Next slide, please. The purpose of the IWG basically was to be an advisory group that would help inform this periodic reporting to the Air District Board on 2 key aspects of rule implementation: technical readiness and an equitable transition. The IWG comprises over 40 invited members representing a variety of stakeholder segments, including environmental justice groups, community-based organizations, subject matter experts in building energy, affordable housing development and technology, regional and local government, and relevant state agencies. It also includes labor and trade organizations, utilities such as PG&E, and community choice aggregators, or CCAs, which are your local energy service providers. The Air District has actually conducted a very robust engagement process for the building appliance rules implementation, with an initial focus on Rule 9.6. We have done so through several IWG meetings, 6 of which were open to the public, and individual stakeholder meetings and outreach, including to the Air District's Community Advisory Council. Air District staff have also presented and engaged in public events such as county and city electrification fairs, contractor education and workforce events, and forums on relevant topics such as zero NOx rules and building electrification. Next slide. So here are the topics that have been researched by the Air District and discussed with the implementation working group in those meetings that I just referenced. These topics came directly from public comments and concerns that we heard throughout the rulemaking process, and they include market and workforce. In other words, is there enough market supply of appliances that meet the rule standards, and are there enough contractors to install these appliances? Technology, what are the available technologies that meet these zero NOx requirements? How do we simplify their installation, and how do we minimize any associated electrical work? Costs and affordability, what are the upfront costs and operational costs associated with these technologies, and what incentives are available to make these appliances affordable to low and moderate income homes? Housing impacts, what are the potential impacts on renters and the housing market from these rules? Permitting and emergency replacement, how can we make the installation of these appliances easier and faster? And finally, grid impacts and reliability. Should we be concerned about the grid and electric service as we install these electric appliances? In the next portion of the presentation, our team will share key takeaways from our research and discussion with the implementation working group for each of these topics. Next slide, please. But first, here's another quiz question for you. See if you were paying attention at the beginning of the presentation. Which source do you think emits the most NOx or nitrogen oxides in the Bay Area? And while you respond to the quiz, I will pass it to my colleague, Amy Dow, to jump into the first topic, market and workforce.
All right, thank you, Adanya. The next slide. Right. So one of the major concerns that we heard from public comment during the rulemaking process was fear on lack of availability of compliant technologies and contractors. Note that for water heaters, the Air District assumed that the majority of installed compliant technologies would be heat pumps, which are energy efficient appliances for heating and cooling. Like your refrigerator, heat pumps use electricity to transfer heat rather than burning a fuel to create heat. Much of the concern on supply chain was based on shortages during COVID. However, the Air District commissioned surveys from contractors, which found that heat pump water heater supply and shortages is a decreasing concern. For workforce, the Air District commissioned regional research to better understand current contractor and installer numbers in the Bay Area. The research showed positive signs for contractor availability and readiness. So based on national benchmarking or comparative numbers compared to national averages, the Bay Area actually has equivalent levels of relevant contractors. So we looked at plumbers, electricians, as well as HVAC installers. Surveys from contractors across the Bay Area also showed that the majority of contractors are available to respond to emergency failures within a couple days. 2/3 were already aware of the rules, as well as incentive programs, and almost 1/3 had plans to train on heat pumps by 2027. Though overall positive, the workforce research does point to some hiring challenges, as well as the need for more outreach, training, and incentive program participation, especially for small independent contractors. Okay, and next slide. Okay, another major concern brought up during the rulemaking was the expense and added time of additional electrical work potentially required for installing a heat pump. So typical 240-volt heat pump water heaters require non-standard plug outlets. So what you would see for, say, an electric dryer. However, solutions are growing in the market. In the last 2 years, there have been new and additional models for 120-volt plug-in heat pump water heaters, which can use a regular wall outlet. This reduces the need for complex electrical work, including panel upsizing, as well as the time and costs for installation. An increasing number of Bay Area case studies and research also shows that houses can fully electrify all appliances on just 100 amps. This would cover all appliances, including not just space and water heating, but cooking, clothes drying, and electric vehicle charging. Thus, the assumption that older homes will need to upsize to a 200 amp panel is misplaced. However, many homes will need what experts call watt diet or panel optimization strategies. So that means installing lower amperage or plug-in appliances, or installing circuit sharing or circuit splitting devices. For example, that'd be using one circuit to power both your clothes dryer as well as your EV charging supply equipment, or using smart panels that can basically balance the different electrical loads in your home. And you'll see in this slide here, there are links with websites with further information. Right, next slide. All right, another concern brought up during public comment was higher upfront purchase and installation costs, as well as ongoing operational or utility bill costs. The Air District commissioned modeling to look at how utility bills would change after installing heat pump water heaters. So electricity is more expensive than natural gas. However, heat pumps can be up to 4 times more efficient than NOx-emitting gas water heaters. Thus, most homes will see monthly savings on their bills. And for the small portion of customers that do see an increase, it'll only be about $2 a month. The key to maximizing these bill savings is choosing the right rate. So signing up for new electrification specific rates like PG&E's ELEC, and for low and moderate income households that qualify, taking advantage of the discount programs like CARE or FARA offered by PG&E or your energy provider. For upfront costs, since late 2022, we now have better data on project costs and cost drivers based on projects installed in the Bay Area from multiple incentive programs. The average incremental cost in the Bay Area is approximately $1,800 to $3,500 more for heat pump water heaters. Note that this is an incremental or additional cost, not the total cost. The Air District is focused on incremental costs because this is a point of sale rule. So we're not requiring anyone to tear out and replace and upgrade their water heater now, only when their old water heater fails, at which point the homeowner would have to buy a new water heater anyway. There are several incentive programs at the federal, state, and local levels that residents can stack or use at the same time, especially for low, moderate income, or what a lot of folks call LMI households. Getting a zero NOx water heater can be cheaper than a natural gas NOx emitting equivalent, or even zero cost. Federal tax credits up to $2,000 are available for more market rate households that have the tax burden. You can visit the Switches On, which is hyperlinked in the slide here, to learn more about available incentives for where you live and your household income level. So currently available incentives and program budgets are a snapshot in time. So we do want to acknowledge and we know that incentives will be important in the future to offset higher costs for heat pump water heaters, especially for low and moderate income households. And lastly, we do want to note that these are average costs. In the program data, we do see some statistical outliers and edge cases of much higher costs. And I will now hand my presentation, to my colleague, Rich.
Thank you, Amy. Good evening, everyone. Rich Chen with the Air District. Really happy to be here. And I'm going to be talking about housing impacts. A key issue that was raised by stakeholders during the rulemaking process was if rule implementation could have impacts on housing and specifically on renters. This is a topic that's very important to the Air District, and while we're new to much of this, we're very excited to be learning more and to be a part of this important conversation. Our team would like to thank community members, subject matter experts, tenants, and staff from other agencies who shared their knowledge and perspectives with us to help us get more educated about these complex issues. I also want to say that we're very aware of our limited authority to affect housing laws, but through this discussion, we hope to shine a light on key issues related to these potential impacts, and we look forward to continuing dialogue and with others to advance approaches that can mitigate any unintended consequences on renters. Finding solutions to these challenges will help ensure the air quality and health benefits behind the rules are available to all members of our communities. Go ahead, Britta. So we sought to answer the key concern of what impacts could the appliance rules have on housing and renters. And from our research and engagement, we landed on two key takeaways to help answer that question. First, key takeaway was the potential for capital cost pass-throughs resulting from zero NOx appliance replacements. Pass-throughs are a cost recovery mechanism for landlords who invest in certain building improvements that benefit tenants. They typically use established formulas and adhere to certain limits. For example, they must stay within rent caps to calculate a recovery rate for their investment, which is amortized over a period of time and can be done as a separate pass-through or sometimes as an increase in rent. In some jurisdictions like San Francisco, local bodies need to approve petitions from landlords for allowable costs and pass-throughs. The second key takeaway regarded how the substantial repair and remodeling clause in renter protection laws could result in tenant displacement. The substantial repair and remodeling clause, which can be found in local and state renter protection laws, allows landlords to vacate units for projects that meet certain criteria, which are, it's needed for code compliance, it requires a permit from the local building department, and it takes more than 30 days to complete and cannot be done safely with the tenants present in the unit. Related to the rules, this could present challenges for more complicated projects that could require additional retrofit work. And one other key learning is that we found that substantial repair has been known to be used for projects that actually do not meet the criteria as a way to clear out units for new tenants and to charge higher rents. This action is sometimes referred to as a renoviction, combining the words renovation and eviction. And this is discussed a bit more later in the recommendation section. Next slide, please. So for this research project, the Air District's consultant first analyzed local renter protection laws and compared that to data about building types and age, population characteristics, and other information. This local policy analysis can be found within the consultant report on the IWG webpage. From this analysis, they created several maps, including this one, which shows that the higher percentage of renters in the Bay Area has significant overlap with where stronger city level protections apply. But they also flag some other findings, namely that data about compliance and enforcement of existing renter protection laws is scant and hard to find, and that renters are at a great disadvantage when it comes to litigation due to the amount of time and resources it takes. Next slide. So focusing back on what we determined to be the most relevant rental housing issues related to rule implementation, here our consultant recommends ways to mitigate the potential impacts of pass-throughs. First, local agencies could consider ways to prohibit or limit pass-through costs for zero NOx appliance upgrades. Second, efforts could be made to do extensive outreach to landlords to increase their participation in financial incentive programs that will reduce the overall implementation costs and therefore the amounts that are being passed through to tenants. And finally, it was recommended to conduct further research to explore if end-of-life equipment replacements for services provided to make units habitable, such as heat and hot water, could be treated as regular operations and maintenance costs and not capital improvements. And this could change the ability for those costs to be passed through. Next slide. Next, in thinking about eviction protections related to these rules, the following recommendations were put forward. First, local jurisdictions should explore ways to limit the application of substantial repair and remodel for zero NOx appliance replacements. Some California cities, including South Pasadena, have banned substantial remodel evictions altogether. Second, under a no-fault eviction resulting from substantial repairs, assuming the project is a valid use of that clause, expanding relocation assistance for affected tenants. I recently saw that in Long Beach, they increased relocation assistance for rent-evicted tenants and increased penalties for landlords who violated these laws as a direct response to responding to rent evictions. And the third recommendation is to work on developing specific local or state policies to address and prevent rent evictions. And again, the Long Beach example is an example of where that was done locally. I'm going to now, that ends it for housing impacts, and I'm turning it back to Amy.
All right, thank you, Rich. So we'll now move on to permitting and emergency replacements. So another concern that we heard about is that it will take longer and more effort to install a heat pump, which is relevant for permitting and emergency replacements. For permitting, the Air District commissioned research to understand how changes in permitting requirements for zero NOx appliances could affect implementation timelines and costs, and to understand the current status of best practices in the Bay Area. Surveys and interviews from 11 local governments of various sizes around the region showed that turnaround time for issuing electric water heating appliance permits takes less than 3 days in most jurisdictions, and that most cities surveyed have a single permit for heat pump water heaters. A growing number of local jurisdictions are pursuing best practices for heat pump water heating permitting, thanks to efforts from BayREN and Tech Clean California, San Mateo County, and Silicon Valley Clean Energy. For emergency replacements, there are current and upcoming loaner programs and pilots from multiple energy providers. And that includes the City of Palo Alto, Silicon Valley Clean Energy, Peninsula Clean Energy, and MCE. These programs will provide a free temporary loaner until the permanent installation can be completed. Implementation working group discussions also highlighted opportunities for speeding up installations. This once again points to improved permitting, but also points to potential for plumbers to do some light electrical work as allowed by the California State License Board, especially for 120-volt plug-in heat pump water heaters, as well as other opportunities such as increased coordination between plumbers and electricians. Next slide. So we'll now move on to talking about concerns about the grid. And so for grid and reliability, though often voiced by the public as a concern, adding electrical load from the zero NOx appliance rules is unlikely to cause power outages. Most power outages are due not to bulk capacity issues or not having enough electricity, but instead physical impacts. And so downed trees, rainstorms, or power safety shutoffs. There are current and new SB 410 requirements for utilities and the California Energy Commission regarding grid planning for increasing electrical loads, which will include added load from the zero NOx appliance rules. At the appliance level, zero NOx and new NOx emitting gas water heaters have similar reliability in electrical outages. So new gas water heaters will not operate without electricity, which is needed for fans and pilot lights. Tanked water heaters, including heat pump water heaters, can stay hot for several hours during an outage, especially when installed with a cold water mixing valve. Since heat pump water heaters can provide thermal storage, they are increasingly being used for load shifting and demand response by heating water during off-peak utility rate hours. So for residential interconnection, moving on to that topic, some homes that do install larger panels will also need larger utility service lines, also known as service upgrades or energization or interconnection. There are several different terms describing the same thing. Additional costs as well as long timelines can result from panel and utility service upsizing. For those limited number of homes that will need to upsize their utility service, current CPUC proceedings are considering how to reduce service upgrade costs for homeowners, with future CPUC proceedings considering how to improve PG&E wait times for service upgrades. We do want to note, however, that PG&E wait times can be extremely long, anywhere from just a couple weeks up to a year. So, as we mentioned before, emergency replacement loaner programs can help with this. 120-volt plug-in heat pump water heaters and other panel optimization strategies are also solutions to minimize panel upsizing and thus utility service upsizing. And it is very unlikely that homes will need to upgrade panels or electric utility service just for their water heater. Right. Next slide. And so we'll now be moving on to next steps. And so as mentioned before, we just want to point out that today's slides will be posted on the website. And so it has further links to other sites that have a lot more information. But many of today's presented takeaways are just a preview of the interim report that will be published later on next month. In December, staff will present to the board of directors. And then after that, in 2025, anticipated administrative changes for refining definitions and EPA stipulations would happen then. The Air District will also be pursuing further outreach and communications on the upcoming requirements with multiple stakeholders. Okay, next. All right, so I just want to thank you all for your time and attention. On this slide, you'll see the website for the rules page, as well as contact information. And we can now move on to questions and discussion.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Amy, and thanks to the whole Air District team. It was really kind of amazing to hear you summarize, a year and a half of work on as far as my involvement goes, but I know y'all have been working on this much longer. To be able to capture all of that in a half-hour presentation is very impressive. So Thank you. And also really excited to see that we have such a great turnout and that we have so many really good questions coming in via chat. And then I see a couple hands raised. So we will be starting the question and discussion portion of our meeting. And I just want to point out that even though we are, the meeting was supposed to wrap at 7, we are ready to stay on to make sure we can answer as many questions as possible by 7:30 or 7:40 or so. So thank you for your patience as we get to your questions. I would like to start by supporting the Air District staff with answering some of the written questions first that we received in the chat. And then maybe after we address several of those, we can go to some of the verbal questions and comments from the folks with their hands raised. And I'm just going to say I see 2 so far. So again, feel free to click on the reaction below the face and raise your hand if you would like to make a comment or ask a question verbally. Okay, so with that, I'm going to go look at the list of questions that were rolling in from the beginning of the meeting. I think several of them were answered. So we will start with, let me see here. We have a list of questions here. So I will pass it. Let's see. I think that maybe Amy, would you be willing? I'm seeing a question from Aaron asking what coordination is being done with PG&E to ensure that electrical service upgrades can be completed in a timely manner.
And so this is definitely not within the Air District's jurisdiction, but there has been movement and development in this space in the last year and a half. And so Senator Becker passed SB 410, which was basically state legislation that required the CPUC to set deadlines for PG&E. And so this included average as well as maximum deadlines for multiple parts of the energization process. And so there will now be steps that PG&E has to meet, and then as well as annual reporting and much more transparency about how much longer PG&E is taking for this process. And so this is definitely more within the jurisdiction of CPUC rather than the Air District, but there is work and progress happening in this space.
Thank you, Amy. I think you might be the person that would potentially answer the next question I have here. So it's a question from Susan asking or saying currently has a tankless water heater, no space to put a tanked water heater, concerns with expensive additions to power supply for an instantaneous water heater. How will this work once we need to replace our existing unit?
Yeah, that is a great question. I would want to point out that for on-demand tankless water heaters, those are not being covered by the regulations until 2031. And so that wasn't really a focus of this past implementation working group. And so that's something that we'll be focusing on more in the future. But I'd also just point out that there's some time and there's a lot of development and new form factors and models that are being developed by manufacturers. Yeah, there's a lot of development happening in this space.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Amy. So I will move on to the next question I see here. It looks like someone joining us named Randy is asking, how long will the Bay Area Air Quality Management District allow someone to go without hot water or heat should a heat pump replacement require extensive upgrades to a homeowner's home, or is that being left up to the cities? And I'm not sure who would be the right person to answer that one.
Yeah, I can address it. So thank you for the question, Randy. And I think I'm also going to address maybe one of the other questions in here that you had asked. So this is something that we are looking at, right? And I think that this process and this implementation working group and the check-in that we're doing with our board of directors that Amy mentioned in December is something that was specifically written into the rules. It is a requirement of that our board put in there for staff to come back to the board of directors and say, there's a lot of change happening in this space, and a lot of new appliances coming on the market, a lot of new incentives coming around, and all of that. And that we, as with any technology technology rule that's looking forward with dates in the future, we want to sort of put that market signal out there, see what's happening, and then come back and evaluate where we're at. So this is part of the process that we're going through. And as we've done this evaluation, I think that we have come to the sense that there are these cases that we really need to take a look at. And over the next couple of years, we're going to look at what the best possible way to address that moving forward is. And so that's a discussion that we'll continue to have with our board of directors, if there are potential changes that need to be made, and how we can best capture different folks' issues. And if it's a timing thing, if it's a city permitting issue, if it's a PG&E thing, all those sorts of things. So, but this is, I think, it was part of the intended process to sort of have this check-in and to do this and take a look at where we're at. And we're doing this 2 years prior so that we have time to make those changes if we need to. So hopefully that answers that.
Thanks, Jen. And you said you were going to answer another question.
It was one that was related that Randy had also asked. I will.
Okay, great.
I'll cross it off on our.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, so I think our next question is something that, Jen, you're also listed as the person that might be able to respond. I apologize if I'm not saying your name correctly, but is it Nives? Asking Nives or Knives, saying, do steam boilers fall under this rule?
So the rules are based on boiler size. And so the 9.6 applies to all boilers that are under 2 million BTUs. So there is not a steam or hot water or like high heat hot water exemption or change for those. So but most steam boilers are used in sort of commercial facilities that are much bigger. And so those apply to a different rule. That 9.7, which is not included in this, that we have not made updates to in a while. That is something that we've heard. And if the like high heat hot water on the sort of 2 million range boilers is an issue for folks, and if there's more information you want to provide about that, we're definitely open to hearing about that.
Wonderful, thank you. So the next question I see here might be one that we would need Greg potentially to answer. Also from Randy saying, concerns with these being unfunded mandates, what authority does BAAQMD have to do this?
The Air District has had rules that set requirements on NOx emissions for these appliances going back, I think, as far as 1983. And often those rules have imposed additional costs on property owners. And so this is a long-standing practice as a general matter, right? Now, this is a much bigger deal, right? Because unless the appliance manufacturers come up with a way to have zero NOx gas-fired appliances, that's going to require a change in the infrastructure of a lot of properties. And that's what we're working with the implementation working group on, trying to find a pathway to minimize that, trying to find practices to connect people with the incentives that are available. But it is going to be a cost for property owners. And that is the way air pollution regulations work. It's the folks who have the polluting equipment bear the costs for cleaning up that equipment.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, So I think that I'm gonna move us over to some of the verbal questions and comments. So the first Zoom hand I see raised is from Neves. I'm not sure. I'm excited to hear how to say
Hi.
his name.
Yeah, it's Neves.
Neves. Okay, that was the first
Yes.
one I said.
Yeah, you were right. You were correct. Thank you.
Great.
So my name is Neves Kornick, and I'm a director of construction for a real estate investment company that has a lot of multifamily buildings in San Francisco and Oakland. So this rule will affect us tremendously, let's put it like that. And my question is, do we need to replace all our water heaters and furnaces before the set due dates, or is it just like when our appliance, let's say, isn't functioning anymore, like, it breaks after the due dates, we need to replace it with the electrical one?
Yeah, I can answer that. So no is the answer. You don't have to replace them before the due date. So the rules are point of sale rules. And so what we mean by that is the point of sale of the appliance itself is what the implementation is, what the compliance date refers to. So it's after, for small water heaters, January 1st, 2027, any appliance manufactured after that date has to comply with the requirements in order to be sold or installed in the Bay Area.
Okay.
We're not asking people to do this preemptively. It's upon regular burnout of an appliance that this would phase in over time.
Okay, so in our case, we are not so much concerned about the water heaters, because there are some units that have, the small water heaters in the units, and, replacing them with the heat pump water heaters, it's not such a big issue. Also doesn't trigger the electrical upgrade. But when we were looking into like commercial water heaters that are servicing, I don't know, buildings with 70 units, it turns out we won't have enough power, so we will need to do an electrical upgrade. Electrical upgrade in San Francisco, I will be completely honest with you right now, is a headache. We are working in some of the buildings for 3 years now because like it was a supply problem, which still is a little bit with meters delivery and everything. So the other thing is, it's like, yeah, in PG&E, so we are working on some of the electrical upgrades for 3 years now. Like, I know that, that date is like 2031, so we hope it's going to change something. But we also noticed that some of our current like boiler rooms spaces are not big enough to support the new, available electrical water heater system and tanks. So we would actually need to do a lot of construction also on this side or find another appropriate room for that. So it's actually will be really, really costly for us. And as I understood is that this won't be a pass-through. Is that correct?
Yeah, thank you for that comment. I don't know that I can speak directly to pass-through costs. I think it's going to depend on jurisdictions, and I'm not
Okay.
caught up on all the San Francisco
Okay.
renter laws. I don't want to speak to that right now, but we can
Yeah.
definitely follow up on that.
Okay.
But I appreciate your comment on that. As we said, we have been focusing on the first upcoming implementation date for the small water heaters. So it's below 75,000. So like small tanked ones, but that's definitely helpful. And I definitely appreciate your comment on that. And it's something that we will be looking at moving forward. So thank you.
Because just also just a thought, what is preventing the landlords, let's put it like that, to actually replace the existing, gas water heaters like in a year before the, compliance dates and, have, I don't know, gas water heaters for additional 25 years based on the, will you address this issue somehow, or is this like
The way the rule is currently written, that would comply with our standards if a replacement is done before the rule goes into effect. So that is just the way that it's set up in the nature of these point of sale rules and how they roll through. And that's how we've had our rules structured with these NOx requirements for a long time. But I appreciate your concern on the emissions from that.
Okay, cool. That was all from me. So thank you very much. This was very informative. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you. And okay, so the next hand I see up here is from Michael Kapelnik.
Kapelnik, the second one is correct. Hi, my name is Mike Kapelnik. I'm a community member. I've been following the rural development for a while now. And it seems to me that the emergency replacement issue will be a big one. And I think one of the main tools that's being proposed for that are these loaner water heaters. And that's great, but the slide that was shown kind of implied that that's going to be handled by local jurisdictions like Silicon Valley Clean Energy, et cetera. Somehow the air district needs to be sure that when the rule goes into effect, that anyone that needs one can get one. I mean, people may not need service upgrades, but they may need a smart panel, a sub panel, or other electrical upgrades that will take some time. So Jennifer Lamb, I think, kind of implied that in the next 2 years before they go into effect, more work will be done. So I'm hoping that the Air District actually focuses on how to make sure that anyone in the Bay Area that needs a loaner can actually get one. Particularly, I think, because I know that there right now, some contractors have been offering that for a while, but I believe the way the rule is written, that a contractor couldn't procure any more loaner heat pump water or gas water heaters after the rule goes into effect, that even a contractor couldn't buy one and put it in their inventory as a loaner. And you can't really expect contractors to anticipate the need for these loaners ahead of time, buy and store them. So again, I think the Air District needs to really look at this and have a good strategy to ensure that if someone needs a loaner, they can get one and not be without hot water for however long it takes to get their upgrades done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
Did anyone want to respond to that from the Air District?
I was just gonna say thank you, Mike, for that comment. That's really helpful. I think Silicon Valley Clean Energy was referenced as sort of like, we know this is a program that's ongoing right now and as an example of things that we've seen. But we definitely take your comment about that and the not expecting contractors to anticipate that need and all of that. And so it's definitely super helpful. And thank you for your comment.
But we also want to note these loaner programs, a lot of them are shifting away from gas water heater loaners, and a lot of them are starting to just use the plug-in 120 volt water heaters. So they may not be the permanent installation in terms of being able to provide the amount of hot water that would be needed for larger households. So households that might need a typical 240 volt, but those are also increasingly being used rather than the gas loaners. So I just wanted to point that out. It doesn't have to be a gas loaner.
Thank you. Okay, I'm gonna take one more Zoom or verbal question, and then we'll pop back to the questions from the chat. So thanks everyone for your patience again. The next Zoom hand I see is Jeff Zell.
Hello, thanks. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Mine's a long bunch of stuff and a bunch of questions. I'm probably one of the few that actually perform load calcs and cost estimates for a 40-unit apartment building that I own. Things to know are PG&E lead time right now is about 2 years. I would need to trench and install transformers for anything over 400 amps, and that would be both feeds. It's going to require 40 new meters, 40 new wire pools, 40 new breaker panels, 40 new wires from breaker panels to heat pumps, electrical and site adjustment permits for installing those heat pumps. In some places, I can't install heat pumps because they would block the driveways or walkways. The total cost for this project will exceed at least 800,000, if not a million or 1.2. So we're looking at 25 to $30,000 per unit for these upgrades. If a gas wall heater goes out before I can get any of the foundational work done to this, tenants will be without heat indefinitely, maybe without hot water indefinitely. So my questions are, how is PG&E going to be able to deliver sufficient power in a timely manner? Who's going to pay for compensation, or when San Jose and other places have reduction in service petitions? So like Mountain View has those too. So who's going to pay for that if their service is reduced? Who's going to pay for relocation? And I've got rent controlled units, so I can't pass through. And I'm definitely not going to recoup my money at $25,000 per unit. And so I want to know who's going to pay for these upgrades for these $1 million for a 40-unit building. I mean, don't all look at me once and start like you know the answers, because y'all are staring like this is all a simple thing. And I've had this conversation with the city of San Jose, and when I told them the facts on this one, they went blank like you did too.
Well, thank you, Mr. Zell. I will go ahead and see if anyone from the Air District would like to respond. This
Yeah.
is good for, awareness. Thank you, Amy.
Yeah, I think at least speaking to the transformer upgrades, and so right now the CPUC, as a part of one of their live active proceedings, is considering socializing or rate basing or spreading out, across PG&E ratepayers, the costs for upgrading or upsizing electrical line services for building owners, homeowners that are upgrading their service due to electrification of appliances. And so the proceeding is live and ongoing. They haven't come to a decision yet, but that is an open question that is under consideration at the CPUC.
Amy, if I may, Jeff, this is Rich Chen. I chatted you, offering that we'd love to connect and just learn more about your project and what you're experiencing. So if you are interested, please email me, and I'd love to just chat sometime. Thanks.
I will email you, Rich. It is not my project and what I'm experiencing, is the research I've done on this. A 40-unit building is going to cost me $1
Okay,
million.
thank you.
Thanks.
I'm gonna move on, but just out of respect to the other people that have questions, but thank you. And Rich is ready to get on a call and take your comments offline. Thank you so much. Okay, so I'm gonna go back to the written questions. And I see one from Luther saying that low NOx furnaces are noisy and subject to zoning requirements. High efficiency furnaces in hybrid systems should be allowed to reduce these concerns. Did anyone want to respond to that, maybe on the noise aspect? It looks like Jen, maybe.
No, I appreciate that concern. This was something that we looked into in the rule development and like our requirements under California Environmental Quality Act. We had to look at noise requirements, but I can see that. So I appreciate your comment and the consideration for this units. Definitely something to consider.
Thank you. Okay, so let's see. We have a question that I think Amy might be able to answer from Leslie, saying concerns with local jurisdictions having varying levels of consistency enforcing these requirements.
Okay. So we've gotten this question from local governments in terms of them enforcing our rules. And we just want to point out for local governments that local governments are not obligated to enforce air district rules. So these are point of sale rules. Typically compliance and enforcement would happen at distributors, at retailers. We're not going into people's homes. However, I know there are some local governments that are interested in assisting with compliance and enforcement. If local cities choose to withhold permitting until an appliance has been installed that meets all applicable regulations, including air district emission standards, like they can choose to do so, but they're not obligated to do so. if that makes sense.
Okay, thank you. I guess, let's see if the person that asked that question is still on. I think it was Leslie. So, okay, I thank you, Amy. All right, so I'm gonna go back. It looks like Randy has a question about the grid, asking if BAAQMD is working directly with PG&E to determine which areas will require service upgrades. Also, I'm just going to throw in there that on the upgrades, Randy was asking, it takes longer than 1 to 2 days to do extensive upgrades. So how will that be addressed? I'll just put those both together.
Yeah, so I do want to point out that PG&E is a part of our implementation working group. Staff meets regularly with PG&E staff. In terms of knowing which areas will need upgrades, they do have dynamic system maps that are online and available. Those things change. And so just because, PG&E is constantly working on different parts of their distribution grid. And so it's hard to predict, considering that these rules phase in over time based on appliance burnout. The status of the grid today will not necessarily be the exact status in 5 years or 7 or 9 or 12 and so on. But there are tools out there to kind of see capacity mapping, essentially, local capacity mapping.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm gonna go back to Zoom hands now. So Susan, thanks for your patience. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I was the person that submitted the first question. There was a piece of it that was left out, though, when the question was answered. I guess that the point is that we've had a tankless water heater for quite some time now. We've replaced it once, and I got to tell you, it is really efficient. We have maybe a $5 gas bill in the summertime when we're not using any other natural gas. And for the rest of the time, it sits there empty, but it does require quite a bit of instantaneous gas at the time. And it just kind of astounds me that the district even passed a rule that included tankless water heaters because they are so efficient in the base case. But more importantly, we do not have space for a regular water heater in our house. It's an older home. The tankless water heater serves it. And we've already upgraded our electrical system once to take care of some additional electrical use that we're having for something that's more efficient. And so adding that additional expense, we've looked at the cost and the amount of instantaneous power that's required to continue to use a tankless water heater, and it's a lot. I mean, it requires an entire new panel. And so is there any consideration in these situations where there just isn't really a reasonable, cost-effective, and I guess, feasible way to replace a tankless gas-fired water heater with an electric tankless gas-fired water heater? I'm guessing I'm not the only one that has that question because there's quite a few out there. I know a lot of people have tried to make their homes a lot more efficient. And I don't know, I'm just really kind of aghast.
Yeah, thank you, Susan. I think Jen with the Air District is ready to respond.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that question, Susan. And as you noted, and I think that you're having this concern now, Sylvan, I just want to, just for posterity, note that the tankless water heaters are under our 2031 requirements. So the specific space issues and the specific issues associated with that was not necessarily the focus of our research for the past year and a half. And it is something that we are required by the text of the rule to come back and report back to our board 2 years prior to that implementation date, which would be in 2029, which we all know will be here way faster than we think it will be, and is definitely research that we will continue to have ongoing. But yeah, I mean, I definitely appreciate the tankless water heaters. I know that they were installed a lot, especially in a specific period of time in the last 10, 20 years, for their water efficiency. From an air quality standpoint, they do have similar impacts to the other units, which is why we want to make sure to look at them and understand what the best way to defray those health impacts are. But the space constraint problem is definitely a concern, and one that we'll be continuing to look closely at, especially as we get much closer to that 2031 date, as they are still able to be installed now. But I definitely appreciate your concern on that. And
thank you, Jennifer. And I am interested in seeing the background behind the emissions from a tankless water heater compared to a regular hot water heater. I just have a hard time believing that they're similar from my technical background. So is there a reference that you can provide us so that we can look at that?
I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to put like the exact thing in the chat in this meeting, just because we have a lot of things going right now, responding to everyone's questions. But I will definitely, if you want to chat directly to me, I can, with your email or something like that, I can definitely get that to you. Or if you email the rule development at BAAQMD.gov email, we can definitely respond there. And that's a great question and something that we can consider just putting on our website for folks if they have similar questions. So thank you.
Yeah, I think that that's important. Thank you, Jennifer. So I'd respond either to you or to who?
So Adanya actually just put in the chat our sort of general rule development email address. And so you can use that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you. And Dave Clark, thank you for your patience. Go ahead.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I've been helping a couple of people that are in condominiums, and they're trying to replace their small 35-gallon water heater with a heat pump, and it doesn't work for so many reasons. First of all, the neighbor next door, it's, their water heater adjoins a bedroom. Secondly, there's just not enough power. Also, they'd have to penetrate the wall where the condensate line, and most of the problematic is the fact that the condo association won't allow them to even change the color of the paint, let alone install this equipment. So if the cost is more than 2 or 3 times the hot water, that of a gas hot water heater, are there any rules that would, in consideration for exceptions, if the cost is just unreasonably high? That's the question.
So as the amendments are written right now and as they were passed in 2023, the answer to your question is no, just from a rule compliance standpoint. Again, this is why we are having this check-in and this research, and why we'll be having a check-in with all this similar information with our board in about 6 weeks to discuss that. And then we'll have a sort of larger discussion with them about that. I think we also don't necessarily feel comfortable telling people what is too expensive for them or not. So we're looking at different policy options of how we can.
Well, I also follow AWHI proceedings, American Hot Water Institute, and they're only starting to produce these small kind of mobile home size hot water heaters in any capacity. So I don't even think in the next 3 years they'll be available in any capacity quantity. So if you would add that to your notes, I'd be obliged. Thank you.
Will do.
Thank you. And yeah, Greg, go ahead.
If I could just add to what Jennifer was saying, the purpose of this report that we're presenting in December and the timing of it was designed to be a safety valve, right? So the board passed this rule based on what we knew at the time. We've spent the past year doing additional research, and we're presenting the results of that research in December. And then the next step will be to look at that research and say, look, are there adjustments we need to make to the rule to avoid some of these worst case outcomes? to buy folks more time, to identify a solution for the emergency replacements. So those are all discussions that we're having internally. And there are a lot of things on the table as far as possible rule changes ahead of these compliance dates. And what we're hearing today, what we'll hear back from the board in December, watching kind of these incentive programs and these low-income support programs evolve will inform our internal discussions. And then we'll be having some, additional work with folks outside of the Air District to think through whether we want to make any changes to these rules prior to the implementation date. So we can't commit to anything right now. There's a lot more analysis that needs to be done, but it's really helpful to have these issues identified and to, kind of get them on the list of, okay, here's another kind of issue we want to address when looking at possible changes to the rule.
Thank you so much. Okay, well, let's see. So Susan, I think your hand's still raised from before, so we're gonna go back to some of the written questions. Let's see here. I think we'll start with one from Randy that's asking, and I think Amy has offered to take this one. What metrics is the Air District using to determine Bay Area readiness for the water heater rule to go into effect in 2027 and the furnace rule to go into effect in 2029?
All right, I'll speak to the small water heaters. And so as we kind of went through in the slides, there's multiple topics and multiple pieces of research that have been done for each topic. And so when we think about market availability and readiness, looking at the surveys and benchmarking for the workforce, looking at surveys with contractors on wait times for heat pump water heaters. We didn't discuss this in today's slides, but we are tracking things like sales numbers for heat pump water heaters and heat pumps in general. When we look at some of the grid issues and the grid impact issues, looking at developments in the space for PG&E and wait times for service upgrades and developments in that space. And so there's multiple metrics that we're looking at. I wouldn't necessarily say that there's just one or two because there's been a lot of data and research that has happened, but we are looking at all of the major topics that has been coming in through public comment and through meetings like this.
Thanks, Amy. And I think you're on deck for a couple other questions, if that's okay. So one is on workforce from Brad, asking what will prevent contractors and others from obtaining water heaters and furnaces in other areas outside of BAAQMD's jurisdiction after they are banned in the 9 counties?
So I'll actually take that one. As of right now, we have heard this concern, the sort of leakage coming in other areas. So I did want to note that this is something that the South Coast Air Quality Management District also has one past rule and 2 proposed rules out right now that would have similar requirements, similar timelines. And so that's a process that's ongoing at the moment. And that the California Air Resources Board, so statewide, is also looking at these appliances from their point of view. And they don't have any official rule proposals out, but that is something that we are in contact with them and trying to align anything that comes up. So obviously South Coast is not directly adjacent to the Air District in the Bay Area, but just from a statewide market perspective, I wanted to put that out there. And yeah, it is something that we are concerned about. It's something, I think there was some responses in the chat about enforcement, that we look at this from a wholesaler and retailer distributor sort of point of view, typically from an enforcement standpoint, to see what's sold into the Bay Area. We're not going to be able to stop every single person from bringing it into the Bay Area if there are still jurisdictions after the dates in which that happens. I think you also can't stop everyone from speeding on the road. That doesn't mean that it's not a really important safety measure to have a speed limit. And so that's not 100% of analogy, but that is the way that we look at it, and we do want to get the health benefits that we can and enforce it as we are able to moving forward.
Thank you, Jen. So the next one has Amy listed as a potential responder, but so this is on exemptions and costs from Dave, asking, are there hardship exemptions for situations where the cost of installing a heat pump is double that of a gas-fired appliance?
At this point in time, no. So as we mentioned, there may be potential changes in 2025. We're definitely going to be making certain definitional changes and administrative changes, but at this point in time, no.
Okay, so thank you. Maybe that was a repeat. So thanks for answering. I don't see any other hands on Zoom hands raised. So I'm gonna just stick with chat and we'll try to wrap these up. So we have a question from Aaron saying this was not answered in the staff report. What is BAAQMD's estimate of affected units and what methodology went into this estimate? Did the estimate include a less than 2 MMBTU? I'm just water boilers installed in parallel commercial buildings.
So the emissions estimates are actually our emissions inventory is actually based on complete natural gas usage in the Bay Area, and that's data from PG&E and other utilities in the Bay Area. And then we and they have metrics of that natural gas use and how that gets split out into residential and commercial buildings, and based on what appliances, based on their usage data and their knowledge of that. And so our regional air emissions estimates are actually based on that overall natural gas usage data. And so that does include different equipment types, different building types, and all of that. I think I probably missed a part of that question when I answered it.
So PG&E doesn't have the data to determine how much of the natural gas burn in the Bay Area Air Quality Management District's service territory is run through less than 2 million BTU per hour boilers, right? Because there are many, many, many commercial facilities that are running stacks of those. That would not show up in PG&E's gas usage data. And that's going to be a major implementation challenge.
Okay. Let me reread your question, and if there's anything else that I forgot to say, I will respond to it in the chat, but I appreciate that input. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Jen. Let's see. Okay, so I see one that might be one for Amy on technology from Randy, saying, does a 120 volt water heater need a dedicated 120 volt circuit?
Yes.
Got it. Okay, thanks. And let's see, I guess we can go back to Zoom hands. So Tony Fisher, go ahead. I see your hand is raised, Tony. There you go.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, it's Tony Fisher representing the Coalition for Clean Air, and I just have one question. And I thought one other person might have asked it in his chat, but how many housing units are there in the Bay Area?
That data is in our staff report, and I do not have it in my fingers right now. I'm sorry, I have too many windows open. But I linked the socioeconomic report from our rulemaking to respond to Randy for one, and that is where that information lives, but I will go grab it and put it in the chat. Thank you.
Thanks, Jen. Thank you, Mr. Fisher.
Okay.
Okay, so we have more questions from the chat that I would welcome Air District staff to review. and respond to any that you're able to respond to. So it does look like we got to most of them, though. Now that I'm seeing that they've been mostly answered. The only one that I'm not seeing answered is similar to Mr. Fisher's question about how many homes will be impacted. And Jen's gonna find, okay, there she goes. Thank you, Jen. So in the chat from our socioeconomic report, 2,733,300 households with 1,809,900 using utility gas as its heating fuel source. Okay, thank you.
That 2.7 is a total, 2.7 is a total households number.
Okay. That makes sense. Okay. Let's see. Okay, I believe we've gotten to all of the questions. Unless there's some new ones that you can see in the chat right now.
So I see Brett's question, will people be able to install tankless water heaters to replace their tank ones after the rule goes into place? So the way that it is structured right now, after 2027, if you did want to install a tankless natural gas water heater before 2031, you would be able to do that. That would be compliant. That would comply with the rules as they are written.
Great. Okay, thank you. So maybe just to be sure, I might recommend that someone put the email one more time in the meeting group chat where folks can send additional questions or potentially, as we heard tonight, that Air District staff would be happy to get on a call with folks that need to discuss these matters in more detail. So let's see. Okay, thanks for that recommendation, Randy, about an additional outreach. Thank you, Adanya, for adding the email address. So it's rule development at BAAQMD.gov. And you can send additional questions there. You can follow on the website for updates.
Yeah, and I also just wanted to note too, a lot of these questions on our website, and if someone can put the link in the chat for me as well, we do have all of the consultant reports that have all of this data that we've been talking about, a lot of the cost data, technology, all of that. There's a lot of really great work that went into that. So if people want to access that, also on the website are the slides, which have the clickable links to a lot of things that Amy was talking about as well. And this will be recorded. So if you have friends that want to watch it, let them know.
Yes, thank you so much, Jen. Yeah, we have the recording for tonight's meeting. So that'll be available at the link that we shared earlier. I wonder if we should share the link again too before we log out. There it is. Thank you, Eric. So the link is available in the chat. So please stay tuned, and thank you again, everyone, for joining and for all of your excellent questions. And we hope you have a good evening.
Thank you.
As people are logging off, can you quickly, Randy, if you can quickly repeat the answer on tankless water heaters? Between 2027 and 2031, yes, you can install a natural gas-fired tankless water heater. Or until 2031, but yes, after 2027.
Thank you. Have a good night, everyone. Thank you again.
Okay, thank you.